It starts quietly. A mobile phone rings where it shouldn't. A cell buzzer pressed one too many times. A package tucked inside a bin that no officer admits to touching. 3 prisons, 3 uniforms. On the surface, everything is in order. But underneath, messages, calls, and intimate favors. Lines crossed slowly, then all at once. This is the story of 3 prison officers and how love, lust, and pressure turned keys into contraband. HMP Shots isn't a place where mistakes are supposed to happen. A maximum security facility in Lanarkshire, Heather Mackenzie worked there for 3 years. Reliable, familiar, with no formal complaints. But in March 2020, that changed. Inside the cell of Zach Malavin, a convicted murderer, officers found more than they expected. Not just the usual hidden spice or tobacco, but 1.45 grams of cocaine, a sleeping pill, and an iPhone. The search triggered alarms. Not because of the drugs, those had been found before. It was the phone, and what was on it? Contacts, calls, and conversations. Mackenzie's name kept surfacing. Police Scotland and the Scottish Prison Service launched a joint operation. This wasn't about one officer bringing in a few small items. It was wider and deeper. Consistent intelligence reports said Mackenzie had built a relationship with Malavin. Not just trust, something closer and something constant. Prison logs and staff patterns reviewed, and the same officer was seen working his wing more than most. But it wasn't just presence, it was timing. Her shifts matched up with contraband discoveries. Her entries logged minutes before key recoveries. The deeper investigators looked, the more regular it appeared. She wasn't slipping, she was operating. Every movement served a purpose, and every item recovered pointed to a plan. The question wasn't just what she brought in, it was how long it had been going on, and who else might be involved. The uniform gave her access. What she did with it shattered the structure, and it was only the beginning. By the time officers began digging deeper into Mackenzie's movements, the scale of her involvement was becoming clear. This wasn't an impulsive decision. There were layers to it, planned exchanges, trusted drop-offs, and a network that extended beyond prison walls. Investigators traced her links to several unidentified men. Unidentified associates arrived at her home in 4th Lanarkshire. They brought phones, syringes, cash, £2,500 in bundled notes. They handed over items on the doorstep. She accepted them without resistance. Inside Shots, the delivery process was quick and targeted. Some items were passed through staff areas. Others were hidden in pre-agreed stashes near Malavin's cell, sometimes in a prisoner's safe, sometimes left in plain sight during staff transitions. It wasn't improvised, it was scheduled, consistent, and precise. A second prisoner was pulled into the loop. He stored items, passed them between wings, and kept his head down. Until one day, he hesitated. He told Malavin he didn't want to get caught. Mackenzie was sent to speak to him. She gave him assurances there'd be no searches. His cell was safe. The system was covered. Police would later raid Mackenzie's home. Inside, they found several mobile phones, syringes, steroids, and traces of cocaine. In a garden shed, they uncovered 28 grams of benzocaine, a known cutting agent, alongside packaging and paraphernalia. Each item recovered added weight to the case. This wasn't the kind of smuggling that relied on panic or pressure. It was calm, deliberate, and structured. She knew the corridors, she knew the checks, and for 7 months she knew exactly how to bypass them. But where Mackenzie's network was driven by supply and structure, the next case didn't involve drugs or logistics. It started with flirtation and spiraled into something far more personal. HMP Lincoln wasn't new to tension, but staff didn't expect it from within. Emma Webster had joined the prison service in early 2021. A mother of two with no disciplinary record. She wasn't flagged or watched before, but in August, a name started appearing on an inmate's contact list, and it wasn't hers. Bradley Bramall was serving time when he added a new mobile number. The name shown, Emma Smith. It was nothing unusual at first, until officers noticed the frequency of contact. Prison logs showed 17 separate calls between Bramall and the unknown contact. They pulled transcripts, and the voice on the other end wasn't a stranger. It was one of their own officers, Webster. The calls weren't disguised. They spoke about sex, openly and repeatedly. Webster denied any relationship when first questioned. She said she was being friendly, that it never crossed a line. But the evidence said otherwise. There were no threats or pressure. She initiated contact, maintained it, and never stepped back. On October 6th, that relationship ended abruptly. Eight days later, Emma Webster changed her working pattern. She moved to night shifts, away from the daytime rota where she'd first met Bramall. Her new wing held a familiar face. Jimmy Bennett. He wasn't a stranger. They'd known each other before his sentence began. And inside, their contact picked up where it left off. The staff noticed small signs. The buzzer from Bennett's cell pressed repeatedly during the same hours. Webster often close by. Then came the call records. 75 phone conversations logged between them. One, in particular, drew attention. Explicit in content, with no attempt to hide it. From there, the contact grew more personal. Letters from Webster to Bennett. Detailed, affectionate. Each one signed, "Your future wife." And then came the photograph, recovered during a routine search, a photo of Webster in her underwear. By now, staff knew what they were seeing, the change in shifts, the pattern of communication, a voluntary breach played out across weeks. This wasn't about coercion or bribery, it was about attention, and the feeling of being wanted, even if it meant risking everything. By the time the second affair was flagged, Webster was already under investigation, but she hadn't yet been charged, not until the full picture emerged, and her actions were placed side by side. Because in another prison, another officer was breaking rules for a different reason entirely, not out of desire, but out of desperation. HMP Birmingham had seen smuggling before, but not like this. In June 2016, during routine searches, a prison officer was spotted using an unusual route. Richard Stack was an 11-year veteran of the service, known and trusted. He entered through the staff gate as usual, but instead of heading to the wing, he veered off into an admin block where he had no assigned duties. Security flagged the movement. Moments later, a bin inside that block was searched. Hidden inside a black bag, a cocktail of banned items. There was herbal cannabis, a psychoactive substance, then still classified as a legal high, and 2 memory cards for mobile phones. When questioned, Stack denied everything, said he'd never seen the contents, but officers searched his car, a Ford Focus parked in the staff lot. What they found removed all doubt. 2 small bags of skunk cannabis, 200 tablets of a Class C drug, an iPhone, and receipts for recent cash withdrawals. During the interview, he admitted everything. He told officers he'd been approached by inmates, he wouldn't name them, but said they'd made it personal. They referenced a tattoo on his back, visible through his uniform shirt. And they didn't stop there. They named his daughter. They knew where he lived. They knew who mattered to him. Stack had no criminal record, no known connections, just mounting debt and no way out. Stack said he was suffering from stress and financial pressure. He'd taken time off work, tried to hold things together, but in the end, he gave in. The inmates had leverage, and he had no safety net. In contrast, the investigations into Webster and Mackenzie revealed no such leverage or threats of targeting. Their relationships developed from access and opportunity, but whether through coercion or consent, the results were the same. drugs and devices inside, systems breached, and trust is broken. Back in court, Mackenzie appeared at the High Court in Larnock and admitted supplying Malavin and others with drugs at HMP shots between March and October 2020. But her defense painted a different picture. In court, her defense leaned heavily on background and vulnerability. They said she was a first-time offender, a single mother, that she had suffered an abusive relationship. They argued she'd been manipulated, targeted and drawn in emotionally, that she was under pressure, that she regretted it all. But prosecutors didn't accept that narrative. They presented logs, WhatsApp messages, and testimony of exchanges over 6 months. Not occasional, they said, but it was consistent, coordinated, and systematic. They outlined drop-offs, payments, and the staging of contraband. Every message, every handover traced back to purpose, not panic. When sentencing finally came, Judge David Young KC didn't speak in headlines. He laid out the facts. Heather Mackenzie had pleaded guilty to 3 charges: supplying a Class A drug, a Class C drug, and providing mobile phones and SIMs to a prisoner. Each charge spanned months. Judge Young wasn't persuaded with the defense either. He accepted the sentence would impact her children. He acknowledged her physical injuries and recent mental health struggles. He noted that she had taken steps to ensure care for her children before sentencing, but none of it outweighed the breach she had caused. He was clear. This was not a moment of weakness. This was calculated, repeat behavior, sustained over nearly 8 months. And what stood out most wasn't the drugs themselves. It was how she used her access. This wasn't about loneliness, it was about agency and abuse of position. And the sentence wasn't just for punishment, it was to send a message to officers, inmates, and the public. That uniform comes with accountability, and when that fails, the consequences reach far beyond one cell. The final sentence for Heather Mackenzie was 75.5 months, just over 6 years. Each term runs concurrently. When the case came before Lincoln Crown Court, prosecutors laid it out plainly. This wasn't coercion. Emma Webster had chosen to cross the line more than once. The prosecution presented the timeline: 2 separate relationships with inmates, messages, letters, and SIM cards. They emphasized how quickly she moved from one prisoner to another, how she kept up contact, even as suspicion grew, and how, in their words, she sought out the connections. Defense counsel attempted to soften the picture. They spoke of personal struggles, emotional vulnerability following a breakdown in her private life, but they didn't argue about coercion, because there wasn't any. In her own interview, Webster had admitted to a non-sexual relationship with Bennett, as we already discussed. When Judge Katarina Sherlin Knight delivered sentencing, her verdict was sharp. You were chasing, not being chased. The court accepted that she wasn't manipulated. She had pursued attention, knowingly and willingly. Emma Webster was sentenced to 14 months in prison for misconduct in a public office, covering her relationships with both inmates from August to November 2021. What followed was more than a jail term. It was the collapse of a career, the loss of trust, and public exposure that wouldn't fade quietly, and above all, brought the system down with her. Before moving forward to Richard Stack's trial and sentencing, it's worth pausing to look at the pattern. 3 prisons, 3 uniforms, with 3 breaches. The methods and motives were different, but the access, always the same. Whether driven by pressure, loneliness, or personal gain, each case exposed a fault line. These breaches happened slowly, over the time, and through moments that didn't seem unusual at first. Each case exposed more than individual failure. They revealed how routine can mask risk, how familiarity can dull scrutiny. In response, prison services have begun strengthening their systems, introducing new checks, reviewing shift patterns, and tightening internal oversight. It's not a fix-all, but it's a step towards greater vigilance. Because no system is immune. but with the right attention, it can be made more resilient. Richard Stack stood in Birmingham Crown Court with little left to defend. He had already admitted what he'd done. In court, the prosecution laid out a clear sequence that had already been discussed. The court heard he had no prior record, 11 years in the job. But the breach of trust was too serious to overlook. Judge Patrick Thomas QC acknowledged the pressure, but didn't excuse it. He said to him, "You knew the damage drugs and phones cause in prison. You succumbed to pressure, but you had a choice." Richard Stack was sentenced to 21 months in prison, not because he was the most dangerous, but because when trust breaks from within, the damage is hard to repair. What do you make of these three cases? Should the sentences have been longer, or were they fair given the circumstances? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want more true stories from inside the UK justice system, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There's always another case to uncover.